Hi, I'm Kaylin, and my mother left me, disabled and helpless, alone in the freezing woods. Imagine lying in the dark, abandoned by the one person who's supposed to protect you. But here's the twist. Someone else was watching every second. And what they saw was just the beginning of years of hidden cruelty, lies, stolen memories, and a family betrayal that runs deeper than you can possibly imagine. Before I reveal who that mysterious stranger was and how my silence finally shattered, tell me, what time is it where you are right now and where are you watching from? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The sky was smeared in grays and fading gold, the kind of light that makes everything look colder than it is. I sat in the passenger seat of my mother's Jeep Cherokee, wrapped in a pilled-up cardigan, fingers tucked under my thighs for warmth. She hadn't turned on the heat, and I didn't ask. I'd already learned to stop asking for comfort. She gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white. Her jaw was clenched in that way I knew too well, like she was chewing a grudge she wasn't ready to spit out. I watched her from the corner of my eye, waiting for any sign this trip was more than what it seemed. "Where are we going again?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't already bracing for something ugly. She glanced at me once, then back at the road. "It's a surprise," she said flatly. "Trust me." Those two words stuck in my chest like cold gum. Trust me. How many times had she said that before breaking something I couldn't replace? We drove in silence past the last gas station on the outskirts of Louisville. Cell reception died with the radio signal. Trees swallowed the road. My body started to buzz. Not the good kind, but the anxious kind, like my nerves were trying to warn me before my brain caught up. I didn't realize this was the last time I'd ever sit in that car. The tires crunched gravel as she turned onto a narrow dirt road hidden between two rows of skeletal trees. No signage, no lights, just wilderness. She stopped the car abruptly, the jolt rocking me forward. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, she was already out, walking around to my side. She opened my door, leaned in, and without a word, yanked me out of the seat. "What are you— Mom?" My legs buckled, one of them twisting under the weight of my own body. Pain shot up my spine. She tossed a duffel bag onto the dirt beside me. "I'll come back when you're ready to stop making everything about you," she said through gritted teeth. "What?" I croaked, trying to push myself up with trembling arms. "You can't leave me here." But she already was. Her footsteps crunched back to the driver's side. The engine revved. The brake lights blinked red through the trees like warning flares. And then they vanished. Silence. No phone, no signal, no wheelchair. Just my bag, a patch of cold forest floor, and me, half limping, half crawling, watching dusk bleed into night. I should have panicked, but something inside me went still. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing against the soft folds of a green damask handkerchief. My sister's. The last thing she gave me before she moved away and stopped answering calls. I clutched it, not because it could help me, but because I needed to believe someone once cared enough to leave me something. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something sharp, maybe pine, maybe fear. I scanned my surroundings, trees like prison bars, and just ahead, the dark outline of a wooden structure, an old deer stand. Dragging myself forward, I scraped my palms on the bark and dirt. My legs screamed with each inch, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally, I reached the base of the deer stand. I curled myself underneath it, jacket zipped tight, bag used as a pillow. My breath came in little gasps, fogging the air. Please don't let me die out here. I stared up at the empty platform above and whispered again, more to the night than to God. My fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Then, snap! The crack of a twig. I froze. Was it an animal? The wind? Or someone watching? I pressed my lips together and waited, heart thudding so hard I thought it might give me away. This wasn't the first time she left me behind, but it's the first time I might not come back. The air had turned sharp and still, the kind of stillness that made every breath feel like it didn't belong. I must have passed out for a while because when I opened my eyes, the last sliver of light had slipped away, replaced by a sky so dark it pressed down on me. That's when I heard it, a rustle. Not the skitter of leaves in the wind, but the weight of something, or someone, shifting nearby. My heart seized. I held my breath. Then another sound, a short, muffled cough, low and human. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. I twisted my body toward the noise, pain screaming up my side. My hands were numb, but I used my elbows to drag myself toward the tree line. And then I saw them. Boots. Not hiking boots or sneakers. Worn leather boots with thick soles and mud crusted around the edges. They weren't moving, just there, standing in the dark, just beyond the reach of moonlight. "Hello?" My voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper. "Please, help!" He didn't speak, not a word. But I saw him step forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, a hood shadowed his face. He crouched beside me, pulled off his backpack, and handed me a half-empty bottle of water. No introduction, no questions, just water, followed by a thick flannel coat he draped over my shoulders like he knew how cold had burrowed into my skin. I asked again, this time louder. "Who are you? Are you a hunter? What are you doing out here?" Nothing. He kept his eyes low, never making contact, and started building a small fire from fallen branches. His hands worked fast, practiced. He struck flint, and within seconds, tiny flames began to lick up the twigs, casting a soft orange glow between us. The warmth felt unreal, still no words. He handed me a granola bar, the wrapper slightly torn. I didn't hesitate. Hunger was louder than caution. He stayed with me for what felt like an hour, maybe more, but never spoke. Then, just as quietly as he came, he stood, pulled his hood tighter, and disappeared back into the trees. I wanted to call after him, ask him not to leave, but the words caught in my throat. He never looked back. The flames crackled beside me, sending flickers of light across the trunks around me. For the first time, the woods felt less like a death sentence and more like a pause. Like something was holding the night back for just a little while, but I knew it wouldn't last. Meanwhile, miles away in our too-perfect home with its polished hardwood floors and overpriced candles, my mother poured herself a glass of wine. Cressida was sitting at the kitchen island, her nails freshly manicured, scrolling her phone. "Where's Kaylin?" she asked, without looking up. My mother didn't flinch. She ran off. Again, said she needed space. You know how she gets. Her tone was casual, practiced, like she was ordering takeout, not rewriting a human being's reality. "Ugh," Cressida groaned, her fingers already flying across the screen. I knew it. She always ruins everything. And just like that, the lie was folded neatly into the family story. No one questioned it. No one called. No one checked. Back in the woods, I shifted closer to the dying fire. My body still ached, but the worst pain came from something deeper. From knowing that my mother hadn't just left me to freeze. She'd erased me. Not physically. That would have been easier. But with a single sentence, she ran off. She turned me into the unreliable one again. The difficult daughter. The problem. I wrapped the flannel tighter around me and stared into the embers. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. I wasn't just fighting cold or fear. I was fighting the version of me they'd created, the one they'd feed the world to make themselves feel better. The fire burned low, but something inside me had started to flicker too, and I wasn't ready to let it die. The birds stirred first. Their wings fluttered in the trees above, calling out to the morning with sharp whistles and clicks. I stayed still under the coat the stranger had left, still wrapped in layers of silence, smoke, and unease. The fire had died sometime before dawn, but the embers were warm enough to remind me I was alive. My limbs ached from lying on the forest floor, my ankle throbbing with a dull insistence every time I shifted. The man hadn't returned. I wasn't even sure he'd been real. My stomach groaned for something more than a protein bar. I took a shallow breath, gripping the cold earth with one hand to push myself upright. That's when my mind, starved of comfort, reached backward, back to one of the last times I still tried to belong. It had been spring. My mother had called a family dinner, one of those mandatory everyone be there evenings that felt more like public court than a meal. I remember the roast chicken burning slightly in the oven. The tension was already thick when I walked through the door. After dessert, she stood in the living room and held up her purse like a prop in a soap opera. $600, she declared. Gone. I didn't understand why she was looking at me. Kaylin, did you take it? Her voice wasn't soft. It was loud, deliberate. Everyone froze. No, I said quietly. Of course not. She laughed then, cold and short. That's funny because no one else has reason to. You've been behind on bills, haven't you? I said I didn't take it. Then who? She looked around like an actress performing to an invisible camera. It always ends up being you, doesn't it? I wanted someone to step in. Maybe my cousin Jonah, who I'd once helped hide his report card from Aunt Lucille, but he avoided my eyes. Even Cressida, my sister, stared at her phone like she didn't know me. That night, I'd gone to my room, heart pounding, fists clenched, and that's when I saw her. Cressida, slipping a thick envelope into her leather tote. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. She just smiled and walked out of the house like she owned it. I said nothing, because it didn't matter. They needed me to be the failure. The scapegoat made their reflections a little easier to look at in the mirror. They loved the lie more than the truth. It kept the family machine humming. And when I tried to protest, I became too sensitive, too dramatic, always the victim. That wasn't the only time they turned my own words into weapons. A few months after that, I came home from physical therapy and found my old journal lying open on the kitchen table. Cressida was reading it aloud. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into a void, and no one in this house hears me, she said in this exaggerated, whispery voice, like some tragic actress. Everyone laughed, even Uncle Barry, who used to sneak me candy during card games. Kaylin the poet, he chuckled, so dramatic. I remember standing there frozen. I had drawn in that journal. I'd poured myself into it. It was never meant for their eyes, especially not for their entertainment. Cressida turned one last page and smirked. I just want Mom to see me too. Her voice dripped with mockery. I snatched the notebook from her hands, but the damage was done. That was the night I stopped writing. Now, crouched by dying embers and dirt, I could still hear the echo of their laughter. How easy it was for them to turn my vulnerability into their punchline. My sister didn't need to punch me. Her words bruised better. I rubbed the heel of my palm against my temple, pushing away the bitter weight pressing against my skull. The pain wasn't just physical. It was memory made solid. I tried to stand but cried out at the flare of pain in my ankle. I grabbed a thick branch nearby, using it like a makeshift cane. Every step I took now felt like penance. Not for what I had done, but for what they said I had. I didn't run away, I whispered into the trees. I was discarded. And yet I was still here, somehow, against what they wanted. I was still breathing. A flicker of wind picked up, rattling dry leaves in the underbrush. I turned slowly, keeping my weight off the bad foot. That's when I saw it, something tucked beneath the exposed roots of an oak tree. I limped toward it, a piece of paper, folded, crisp around the edges like it had been placed, not blown. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Handwriting. My handwriting. A page from that journal they all laughed at. But this page had never left my room. It wasn't burned. It wasn't torn. It was preserved. I scanned the lines I'd written, years ago, heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and wonder. Someone had been reading. Someone who shouldn't have had access. Unless they'd been watching for longer than I knew. The fire had long since burned down, just a soft circle of ash now, but I couldn't stop staring at the page in my hand. It wasn't just any page, it was a sketch I had done when I was 15. A weeping willow, leaning toward a creek bank like it was tired of holding itself up. I remembered that drawing. I'd tucked it between the pages of my journal the night Mom yelled at me for crying during a thunderstorm. Said I was being dramatic. That same night, I had drawn the tree instead of fighting back. But someone had found it. Someone had brought it here. Because now, written on the back in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 6 quiet words. You deserved better. Keep walking. I didn't cry from fear this time. It wasn't the desperation I felt the night she left me. It was something else. Something sharp and soft all at once. Maybe it was the sense that I wasn't completely alone. I tucked the page into my coat and stood, leaning heavily on a branch I'd been using as a makeshift crutch. The sun filtered through the branches now, casting slanted light over the frosted ground. I moved slowly, letting instinct lead, and that's when I noticed them. Small fragments of paper dusting the underbrush like ash from a bonfire. I followed them. Some were barely more than cinders, curling inwards like wounded petals, but others I recognized. Pages from my journal, torn, scorched, scattered deliberately, as if someone had tried to destroy them and then changed their mind. My name was still visible on a few corners. One had the outline of a flower I used to doodle beside every entry, and then there was one that stopped me cold, unburned, whole. It lay folded neatly on the damp ground near the base of a mossy stump. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was my own handwriting, but I hadn't seen this letter in over 20 years. A letter I had written to myself when I was 12. I had hidden it in the attic between two loose floorboards, my secret promise to future me that things would get better. "You are not invisible," it read in my uneven middle school scrawl. "You matter, even if no one says it." I sank down onto the stump, clutching the page. Who could have found it? Who would know to bring it here now? Someone was leaving a trail. Not to hurt me, but to remind me I still existed outside their story. I pressed the paper against my chest, whispering the words like a chant. I am not invisible. When I looked up, I noticed a narrow path threading through the woods, partly covered by fallen leaves and broken branches. Something told me to follow it, and I did, limping slowly, wincing at every step. About a quarter-mile in, I saw it, an old ranger station, half swallowed by vines and sagging at the roof. The door was hanging off its hinges. Inside was dust and damp rot, but against one wall sat a crate, and on top of it, a laptop, old, scratched up, but powered, thanks to a solar charger plugged into the window. The screen was still on. I stepped inside, cautious. The air smelled like mildew and pine. On the screen, a blog dashboard was open. I blinked. My name was typed into the search bar. Posts filled the feed, anonymous, but eerily familiar. She was never weak. They just needed her to be. They called her dramatic when she told the truth. Each post was dated, one from 6 months ago, another from last November, and every single one knew things I had never said out loud, but had written once in my journal. I felt my breath catch. Someone had been watching long before I was left out here. Someone had read my words, and they weren't mocking me. They were documenting me, defending me. One entry said, "If no one listens to her story, I will. I'll remember every page they tried to burn." My mind raced. I thought about the quiet boy who used to volunteer in the high school library with me. He always asked about poetry. He never laughed when I told him I loved drawing trees. I never even knew his name. Was it him? Was he the shadow I'd seen near the fire? The air shifted. I turned toward the broken window. Boot prints, fresh and deep, led toward the stream that cut through the woods. They weren't mine. I stepped outside again, heart pounding. On the other side of the clearing, just beyond the tree line, something moved. A figure. Watching. I didn't feel fear. Not this time. I took one step forward, then another. Not away from the unknown. Toward it. Because whoever they were, they had seen me. Not the version my family crafted. Not the unstable sister or the burden. Me. I gripped the old letter tighter, letting it remind me I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't wait. I moved. The page with the scribbled handwriting still clutched in my hand, I followed where the shadow had disappeared, down a slope cluttered with leaves, through trees that felt older than time. Every step burned, but I welcomed the ache. Pain was the only thing that still told me I was alive. The forest thinned gradually, the sky opening to a hazy late afternoon light. Birds called somewhere above, their songs sharp and indifferent. And then, almost without realizing it, I saw pavement, cracked asphalt, sun-worn and peppered with pine needles. Civilization. I stumbled toward it like a ghost out of a forgotten fable, dragging my right foot as I limped down the roadside. Signs of life emerged, a fence, a mailbox, a gas station with one flickering neon light, and then, just ahead, a small town diner. Warm light glowed from inside. People sat in booths, silverware clinked, laughter spilled onto the sidewalk. And that's when I saw them. My breath stopped, truly stopped, as if my lungs had been punched. There, in a booth by the window, sat my mother. Her hair perfect, her nails glossy around a wine glass. Next to her was my stepfather, chuckling as he shared a joke with my brother and Cressida, who tossed her head back laughing like she hadn't just signed my silence. They were sharing fries, like I didn't exist, like they hadn't left me to die in the woods 2 nights ago. I stood frozen outside the glass. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Their body language spoke loud enough, shoulders relaxed, eyes lit up. My mother reached for another bite. My brother scrolled on his phone. No one looked even slightly shaken. Not a single worried glance around the restaurant. No sign of grief, panic, or even a missed text. They hadn't reported me missing. They didn't think I was lost. They meant to leave me. I wasn't someone they were looking for. I was a mistake they'd corrected. And just when I thought I might actually shatter into pieces right there on the sidewalk, I saw her. River. My younger cousin. The one who used to braid my hair on Saturdays and sit next to me at family dinners when no one else did. Her shoulders were tight. She wasn't laughing. Her eyes found mine through the glass. And for a second, the noise disappeared. Everything blurred except her face. Her lips parted. "I'm sorry," she mouthed, slowly, clearly, twice. My heart thudded painfully. I remembered now, weeks ago, she had walked into the living room while my mom and Cressida whispered in the kitchen. She had paused, lingered. She had heard something. She had known. River had known something was wrong. She'd seen the plan forming. She may not have known how far they'd go, but she had heard enough. And she said nothing. I turned away before my knees gave out. I didn't cry. My body was too dried out for tears. I just walked, past the diner, past the parked cars, past the blinking gas station sign. The town's lights began to fade behind me. Shadows lengthened. I found an old bus shelter a few blocks away, empty, with one broken bench and a rusted trash can overflowing with takeout wrappers. I sat on the edge of the bench and let myself collapse backward. I didn't even care if the wood splintered or if I smelled like the floor of a gas station. I stared straight up at the pale sky and whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I should disappear. Let them win. Let them rewrite the ending however they want." But I didn't move. Not for an hour. Maybe more. I thought of the journal page, the trail of ash, the messages I'd found on the blog. Someone had been watching. Someone had followed my words, my pain, and chosen to hold it, not erase it. That thought barely clung to me as sleep began to pull me under. Not the gentle kind of sleep, but the kind that follows complete defeat. And then something brushed my shoulder. My eyes opened. A bus driver, mid-50s, kind eyes, weathered uniform, stood beside me, holding out a wool blanket. He didn't ask questions. "You okay, honey?" he said softly. I couldn't speak, but I let him drape the blanket over me, tucking it beneath my chin. And somehow, in that smallest act of care, something stirred. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. I wasn't gone yet. I didn't answer him, but when the blanket touched my skin, I remembered what warmth felt like. The bus driver never asked another question. He simply nodded once, tucked the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and walked back to his seat. I stayed there until dawn crept through the glass walls of the station, casting the world in gray light. I could have stayed there longer, maybe forever, but something inside me had stirred last night, and it hadn't gone out. He had pointed me toward a women's shelter just a block away. I shuffled there at sunrise, trailing the blanket like a child with a lost toy. The woman at the desk offered me oatmeal and a shower. I took both in silence. I didn't give my real name. I wasn't ready for the weight of Kaylin again. Not yet. By mid-morning, I was walking through a town I didn't recognize. The buildings were quaint. Wood-paneled storefronts, faded signs, planters spilling over with mums. I didn't know where I was, and it didn't matter. My feet carried me like they knew better than I did. I passed a coffee shop, a thrift store, then a narrow brick building with tall windows and a hand-painted sign, The Bookmark. Something about it made me stop. I stepped inside. The scent hit first. Old paper, worn leather, dust, and time. It smelled like the quiet parts of my childhood. An elderly man behind the counter looked up from his crossword. "Cold out there," he said kindly, his voice like a worn blanket. I nodded. "Just browsing." He squinted. "You're Kaylin, right?" My blood froze. "I'm sorry," I said too quickly. "You must be mistaking me for someone else." But he was already walking toward the back room. "Your father," he said over his shoulder, "asked me to give you something, if you ever came through." I wanted to run. My chest ached, my feet itched to turn and bolt, but something rooted me there. The man returned holding a battered parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with frayed string. "He brought this in just before—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I took the package with trembling hands. My name was scrawled across the front, in handwriting I'd never seen in person. "To Kaylin, for when you're ready." I tore it open right there in front of the counter. Inside was a journal, the leather cracked and soft with age. I sat on a bench beneath the front window, cradling it in my lap. The first page was a letter. "Kaylin, if you're reading this, then I hope you've found your way back to yourself. They took so much from me. I tried to fight. I tried to reach you. I hope this is how I finally do." I flipped through the pages, dozens of them. His handwriting slanted and restless. Letters to me, birthday messages, thoughts, sketches of a willow tree I used to love. He had tried to contact me for years. There were court transcripts, records of blocked calls. One entry. "She's being hidden from me. Her mother says she's not ready, but Kaylin deserves more than silence." Tears fell onto the pages, making the ink blur. In the far corner of the store, I curled up with that journal like it was the only solid thing left. I read every word. I clung to them. This man, my father, had seen me, maybe never in person, but in spirit. He had never stopped looking. I stayed there for hours. The clerk didn't rush me. When I finally stood, I felt different. Still bruised, still angry, but less alone. There was something sacred about knowing I'd been loved by someone who'd never gotten the chance to say it out loud. Someone who tried, even when no one believed him. Even when my mother made him disappear from the story. I walked out into the street, the journal held tight to my chest like a secret. Across from the bookstore, I spotted a small cafe. My stomach growled, but it wasn't just hunger. It was need. This time, I walked in. I ordered a cup of tea, sat near the window, took out the tiny notepad I'd stolen from the shelter and wrote 3 words: "Start over. Remember." 2 weeks later, I stepped off a regional train just outside Seattle, wearing a thrift store coat, a scarf that didn't match, and a name no one had ever called me before. I rented a cheap studio on the outskirts with what little I had saved from working part-time at a print shop in the small Washington town. I didn't talk to anyone about my past. I barely talked at all. But every night, I painted. And every morning, I looked at the canvas and told myself, not yet, not until the story was ready. Now it was. I had submitted the piece under the name KH49 to the curated anonymous gallery for emerging artists. I didn't care about selling it. I cared about what it said, because the canvas spoke louder than I ever had. It was a girl behind a glass wall, her hands pressed flat, her mouth open in a scream no one could hear. The name of the piece, The Forgotten Room. I stood in the back of the gallery, arms crossed, hidden behind a post of promotional flyers. My hair was longer, my walk less limp. No one looked at me twice, until they walked in. Cressida, heels too high for someone trying to look relaxed. Mom, wrapped in one of her ivory shawls, the kind she wore to PTA meetings and court hearings depending on what image she needed that day. They didn't see me, but I saw them, and I waited. They made their rounds, laughing at abstract pieces, whispering about artists they didn't know, judging like they always did. Then they stopped in front of my painting. Cressida tilted her head. "Weird. Feels familiar." Mom chuckled without pause. "These sad artists think silence is a personality trait." Her voice echoed louder in my ears than it did in the room, because it was the same cadence she'd used the night she pulled me out of that car. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. The gallery host stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, everyone, for coming to this year's Emerging Voices Showcase," he said. "Tonight, we'll reveal the names of the artists behind each anonymous work." My fingers tightened around the crumpled tissue in my hand. The host continued, walking toward each piece. Applause followed each name. Then he stopped at mine. "And this," he said, "is The Forgotten Room by Kaylin Halverson." There was a silence so thick the air seemed to solidify. Then a sharp sound, glass hitting the floor. Cressida's wine stem rolled toward a nearby wall. Mom's mouth hung open, words forming but never arriving. I stepped out from the shadow. I didn't wear a smile. I didn't need to. "You told me no one would ever listen to my story," I said. Tonight they stared at it for 20 minutes, and not one of them looked away. Murmurs swept the room. Not one person moved. Cressida's eyes locked on mine, no longer sharp, now pleading. Mom's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment but rage. Because I had broken the script. I had spoken without her permission. But I didn't stay to hear her response. I turned and walked out, my boots tapping softly against the polished floor, step by step, until the doors closed behind me. Snow had started falling. Slow, heavy flakes that clung to my coat. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I wasn't running either. I had stood still, spoken truth, left a mark. Some stories didn't need to scream. They just needed to be seen. I came back to my tiny rented room with the intention of disappearing again. No phone calls, no gallery follow-ups, no more second chances for people who had already written me out. I dropped my bag on the floor and fell into the chair by the window, thinking it was over. I had told my story in the only way I knew how, without names, without confrontation, without screaming. But the world has a way of responding when you stop asking for permission. The first email landed around 7 a.m. subject line. "Thank you for painting what I couldn't say." Then another, and another. A therapist in San Diego asked if she could feature my piece at a trauma fundraiser. A legal advocate from Portland wrote, "If you ever need counsel, pro bono of course, just say the word." But it wasn't just professionals. It was students, mothers, people who had been silenced by someone they trusted. "Are you the Kaylin?" I didn't answer them right away. I just scrolled. And then, the TikTok. Someone had filmed the reveal. The clip was barely a minute long. My painting, my name being read out, the silence that fell, the wine glass that shattered. It went up with a caption that read, "Daughter paints her trauma. Family stares, unaware." In 48 hours, it passed 1.8 million views. Comment after comment piled up beneath it. "She didn't paint this, she bled it." Her mom just stood there and laughed? Disgusting. This is why we believe the quiet ones. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just stared. And then the emails shifted. A journalist from Seattle Ledger, an old art teacher, my former high school counselor. But the one that chilled me came from someone unexpected. "You should know, Child Protective Services just reopened a file. You might be contacted." Attached was a scanned photo. Me, 12 years old, arms crossed at the edge of a school hallway. I remembered the day. My mother had accused me of cutting class. I hadn't. I was waiting for the nurse to clear me to return to gym. Apparently, someone had been watching even back then. My hands trembled as I reached into the back of my drawer and pulled out an old device, my high school iPod, duct-taped and half dead. I charged it overnight once I got it working, scrolled through the voice memos and found it. April 14th. Porch. I hit play. "You're not mine anymore. You're just weight. You think you matter? No one ever cared." Her voice. My mother's. Raw. Unfiltered. I had recorded it without realizing, probably trying to record a song. But I had kept it. Out of fear, proof, or just habit. I posted it. No caption, no tags, just a black background and the date. By evening, my inbox overflowed. And then came the knock. I thought it might be River, my cousin, or even my sister, face full of rage. Instead, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a press badge introduced himself. "Seattle Ledger," he said. "May I ask about the Forgotten Room?" I shut the door gently. My sister called the next day. Her voice was sharp, like always, but behind it I heard something unfamiliar. Panic. "You had no right, Kaylin. No one knows what Mom was going through." "She was going through me," I said, and hung up. That night, the gallery updated their social media. Under the image of my painting, they posted, "We stand with survivors. The Forgotten Room will now hang permanently in our Seattle South branch." I didn't repost it. I didn't need to. That evening, as I sat by my window watching the last bits of winter disappear from the rooftops, I felt something shift. Not inside me, but in the air around me. The cold that used to sit like a stone on my chest had moved. It was in them now. My mother, my sister, the people who had built their comfort on my silence. And then, another knock. I hesitated before opening it. On the porch was a girl, maybe 15, thin, awkward, her hair tied back too tightly. She looked terrified. "I saw your painting," she whispered. "My mom. She says things like that too." I didn't ask for her name. I didn't ask if she needed help. I just opened the door a little wider and stepped back so she could enter the light. I had spent the entire morning with my hands in clay. It was quiet in the small rented studio above the bakery, just the hum of the fan and the occasional creak of old wood. I liked it that way. Silence now felt like something I earned, not something that smothered me. The kiln hissed softly, sealing in what I had created. A phoenix, porcelain white, one wing cracked, perched on a charred branch. I didn't sculpt it to be beautiful. I sculpted it to be real. I glazed it with ash from the forest, sealed the fracture in gold. That tiny crack, I left it visible on purpose. When I placed it beside the Forgotten Room in the gallery's newly dedicated wing, I added a single line beneath the label. "Not everything broken stays broken." Later that afternoon, walking through a thrift store for no reason other than habit, my fingers brushed over something familiar. A porcelain bird, the same type Mom had shattered the night she accused me of stealing. I held it, light as breath, and for a second the old pain stirred, but didn't settle. I put it back. Didn't need it. Didn't want it. Some things don't need fixing. They just need letting go. The next morning, I opened my email expecting nothing. What I found was short. From her. Subject line, "Enough." The body read, "Stop humiliating this family. You're twisting memories." No, "I'm sorry." No, "Are you okay?" Just the same deflection she always used when truth knocked too loudly. This time, I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I didn't respond. Her silence used to break me. Now, mine protects me. I closed the email and opened another. It was from a nonprofit in Oregon that hosted healing through the arts. They'd seen my work. They offered me a chance to lead a group for children, kids who'd survived homes like mine. I didn't hesitate. 3 weeks later, I stood in a modest community center in Eugene. 15 children sat before me, some wide-eyed, some avoiding all eye contact. One girl, maybe 7, drew a crooked little house. I knelt beside her. "Is this where you live?" I asked gently. She nodded. "That's me, hiding behind the fridge." The air caught in my throat, but I didn't let the tears rise. I handed her another brush. "What would it look like if you came out?" She stared at the blank side of the page, then dipped her brush in yellow. She painted a sun, clumsy and bright. That evening, I left the center as dusk draped the street in soft lavender. My phone buzzed. It was an email from my old social worker in Seattle. Subject, "You made it." She wrote, "I just saw the Seattle Ledger piece. I always knew you'd rise. Thank you for never letting them define you." I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing to add. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked up. The sky was bluer than it had been in weeks, air lighter in my lungs, and for the first time in years, I breathed without permission. Sometimes, the people who silence us the most are the ones meant to love us loudest. Kaylin's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always begin with an apology. It begins the moment we stop waiting for one. Have you ever had to walk away to protect your own peace? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit close to home.